My name is Mika Reyes. I'm 42 and I've spent the last 20 years running cyber defense operations for the US government. You've probably never heard of me, and that's intentional. The best firewalls are the ones that no one notices until they're breached. It had been 5 years since I heard from my family. No texts, no calls, not even a birthday card with a passive-aggressive wish you'd visit. The last time I spoke to my mother, she said, "Try not to wear your work clothes to the funeral. It's intimidating." That funeral was for my grandmother, the only person in my family who ever asked me what I actually did. So imagine my surprise when a thick ivory envelope arrived, addressed in perfect script to Monsieur Reyes. No title, no rank, no warmth, just a name barely accurate enough to deliver. Inside, a wedding invitation to my sister Selena's wedding. White orchids, silver embossing, the whole production, and one handwritten note at the bottom. Behave. No, we miss you. No, hope to see you. Just that one word, like I was a potential liability to their curated photo albums. I held the card in my hand for a long time, weighing the irony. They hadn't cared when I was decorated for stopping a breach that nearly collapsed Pacific Command systems. But now, when there's a champagne toast at stake, I was apparently welcome, as long as I kept quiet and didn't ruin the aesthetic. Simmons, my aide, knocked once and stepped in. "The envelope's still on your desk," he said, not looking at me, just at the card. "Are you thinking about going?" I didn't answer right away. "Just say the word and I'll have the logistics team block off your calendar. Or," he added gently, "I can pretend it never showed up." "I'm not going for them," I said finally. "I'm going for the silence. I want them to see what it looks like when the person they erased walks back into the frame." He nodded once and left, without another word. That night, I stood on the roof of our operations wing in DC, watching planes blink across the sky like forgotten thoughts. Below me, the team I trained was running midnight drills. They still called me commander, even off duty. I thought about the way my mother once said, "You've always been so intense. It makes people uncomfortable." I thought about the way Selena used to roll her eyes when I got called back to base during the holidays. I wasn't going for revenge. That's the thing people don't get about stories like mine. Revenge is loud, messy, designed for applause. What I wanted was quieter. I wanted them to sit at their golden tables under rented chandeliers, sipping overpriced wine, and realize that the woman they shoved to the margins had built her own battlefield. That I didn't disappear. I deployed, and now I was returning, not to be forgiven, but to be seen. Singapore greeted me like a postcard, trying too hard. Clean lines, glass towers, perfect humidity. The kind of place where everything gleamed, but nothing felt real. The wedding was at Marina Bay Sands, one of those places where even the lobby smells like luxury. The doorman greeted me with a nod, glanced once at the stars on my shoulder, then looked away too fast, like he wasn't sure if he should thank me or fear me. I stepped inside the ballroom and immediately felt it, the cold calculation behind the warmth. White orchids spilled from crystal vases. A string quartet rehearsed in the corner. Everything was symmetrical, except me. I walked up to the seating chart, a gold easel near the entrance. It was handwritten, floral script, very Selena. I scanned down the list. Table 1, Selena and Jason. Table 2, our parents. Tables 3 through 8, cousins, colleagues, the friends of friends that weddings collect like lint. But my name, just 3 small letters. Mir Reyes. Table 14, near the back, by the kitchen. I looked again. There was no rank, no commander.
Papi Tsienke. Just an initial, shoved between an aunt's +1 and someone named catering lead. Someone had gone out of their way to shrink me. I took my seat in silence. The napkin at my place was a different shade, ivory instead of champagne. Subtle, intentional. Selina always said details matter. Apparently, so did passive aggression. A few minutes later, my mother arrived. She wore a pastel silk dress and that signature tight smile she'd perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. She leaned in, kissed the air near my cheek, and whispered, "I told them to keep it simple. Didn't want the room to feel too military." Too military. As if my presence might stain the imported linens, as if the wars I fought might scuff the marble. I just nodded. During dinner, the table around me talked about travel and real estate. A cousin mentioned a yoga retreat in Bali. Someone else complained about the exchange rate in Paris. No one asked me what I did.
No one even asked where I'd flown in from. I could have been a stranger. In fact, I think that's exactly what they wanted me to be. Then, a voice from 2 seats over. "So, what do you actually do?" asked a man in a blazer too tight at the shoulders. "Something with computers, right?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, my mother cut in with a polite chuckle. "She consults," she said. "Cybersecurity, I think. Nothing too serious." Nothing too serious. I've briefed NATO, I've advised the Joint Chiefs, I've written protocols that stopped entire fleets from falling. But at this table, I was just the woman in the navy dress with a complicated resume and no ring on her finger. And yet, I didn't argue. Because some truths aren't meant to be spoken in rooms that never wanted to hear them. So I sipped my water, folded the ivory napkin into a perfect square, and smiled like I'd practiced. But in my chest, something old and sharp clicked into place. Not rage, not grief, just clarity. They hadn't invited me. They'd invited a version of me small enough to ignore. Too bad I didn't pack that one. When I was 14, I wrote a line of code that broke into my school's firewall. Not to cheat, just to see if I could. I printed out the vulnerability report, left it on the principal's desk, and got detention for unauthorized access. When Selina spilled wine on the new carpet and blamed it on the dog, she got ice cream. That's the story of my childhood. I learned to fix what broke. She learned how to avoid blame. Back at table 14, the string quartet had shifted to something that sounded expensive but hollow. My cousin was showing vacation photos on his phone. Bali again, or maybe Greece. All beaches look the same when you're not invited. I tuned them out and looked around the ballroom. My eyes landed on the head table. Selina, glowing in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, was laughing, camera ready, charming, centre of every shot. She'd always known how to work a room. Even when we were kids, she could lie with a smile and no one ever questioned it. My gaze drifted to my parents. My father looked older than I remembered, his tie slightly askew, as if no one bothered to fix it. My mother sat tall, pearls gleaming, expression tight. I couldn't help but wonder what they told their friends about me. Probably nothing. No photos of my commissioning, no mention of the cyber ops task force I lead. Just silence. Like I'd been edited out of the family story for branding purposes. They didn't know about the sleepless nights, the classified briefings, the threat matrices that lit up in red at 2 a.m. They didn't care that I once ordered a digital lockdown that protected 12,000 lives. What they knew, what they chose to hold on to, was that I missed Selina's engagement party because I was testifying in a secured session before Congress. "They said you made people uncomfortable," my aunt whispered once. "That's why your mother doesn't talk about you much. You overwhelm rooms." No, I disrupted illusions, and they didn't like that. I looked down at the ivory napkin in my lap and saw the embroidered initials, CJ, Selina Joy. Even the linens were personalised. I wondered if mine was the only one without them. Then something shifted. I remembered a document, an anonymous ethics complaint filed 5 years ago when I was up for deputy director. It accused me of militaristic leadership style, of favouritism, of emotional instability. I never found out who sent it, just that it came from someone with internal access, someone who knew what words to use to cast doubt without proof. That complaint cost me a promotion, cost me trust. And now here I was, at table 14, watching the people who raised me toast to loyalty. I took a breath, measured, calm. Across the room, Jason, the groom, was speaking to a man I didn't recognize. His posture changed when he saw me watching. Straightened, focused, like a soldier falling back into form. And just for a second, his eyes met mine. Recognition, not pity, not confusion. Recognition. That's when I knew this story wasn't done. And I wasn't the only one who remembered the truth. The champagne flowed like approval. Toasts flew like confetti. At the head table, my father stood with a trembling glass and said, "To tradition, to unity, to family." Everyone clapped. My mother followed. To grace, to loyalty, and to knowing our place. Her eyes flicked toward me as she said it, a micro-expression, calculated. Then Selina rose, a vision in ivory lace and practiced poise. She took the mic like she was hosting a gala, not her own wedding. "And to my big sister," she said, pausing just long enough for the audience to turn. "I wasn't sure she'd make it," she continued, the room chuckling softly. "I mean, with all those top-secret passwords to guard and hacker chats to monitor." A bigger laugh this time.
But she did. Even flew coach, I heard. The room exploded. And then my mother, not to be outdone, added with perfect timing, "She may not understand weddings, but punctuality, she's got that covered." The room roared. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I reached for my glass, not to toast, but to ground myself. And that's when it happened. The ballroom doors opened, not dramatically, but deliberately. 5 men and women in plain suits entered, their pace steady, too steady. The room quieted. One of them approached the mic Selina had just set down. He held up a badge, but didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "We're looking for Commander Mika Reyes." Heads turned. My name cut through the air like a detonated truth. "Commander Reyes," he continued, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. "We apologize for the intrusion, but Operation Glass Thread has been neutralized. Firewall 9 held. Your protocol worked." Gasps. A fork dropped.
Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Glass thread." The man continued, "The Pentagon sends its thanks. Your early warning prevented a breach that could have compromised satellite defense systems in 5 countries." Silence. Then, from the head table, Jason, the groom, stood. He walked across the room, slow and steady, past our parents, past Selina, who was frozen, her hands still curled around her flute like it might steady her world. He reached me, paused a single pace away, and saluted. Regulation perfect. "This is Commander Mika Reyes," he said, turning to the crowd. "She saved my unit in Bahrain. She's the reason this wedding even has a groom." Another pause. "And now, apparently, she just saved half the world again." You could feel the room tilt, physically and emotionally, like gravity had shifted. From one of the rear tables, a woman in a navy dress uniform stood. Then a colonel in the Singaporean Cyber Defence Force. Then a man I recognised from Brussels, once my translator, now an envoy. One by one they stood, no clapping, just salutes, not for spectacle, for truth. Selina looked at me then, not with hate, not with shame, with fear, not of me, of what she'd made invisible for so long, finally refusing to stay that way. My mother tried to speak, her voice dry. "This is not the time." But no one was listening, because the room had remembered me. And this time it wasn't out of obligation, it was out of respect. The salutes faded, but their echoes lingered in the silence that followed. No one clapped, not because they didn't want to, but because the moment had already said enough. Jason lowered his hand and turned toward the crowd. "I know this wasn't part of the program," he said, voice calm but resolute. "But Commander Reyes doesn't do things for applause. She does them because they're necessary." Then he nodded at me once, like a soldier to a superior, and returned to his table. The room sat frozen. Aunt Marissa blinked rapidly. My cousin Jonah suddenly became fascinated with his wineglass. The man in the tight blazer from earlier quietly slid his chair back like he wanted to disappear. But Selina? Selina didn't move. She stood there, champagne flute still in hand, but her fingers no longer elegant. They shook, just enough for the flute to tremble against the light. When her eyes met mine again, there was no clever line, no performance, just a flicker of something dangerously close to regret. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds, not to intimidate, just to show her I wasn't blinking first anymore. And then I turned. Behind me, the ballroom felt like a movie set suddenly aware of its stage lights. I made my way toward the exit. People parted like a tide, no longer ignoring me, but too unsure of where I fit to speak. At the door, I heard my name. Mika. It was my mother. I turned just slightly. She had stepped forward, not much, but enough to make her heels wobble. She looked smaller than I remembered, the lines around her mouth more defined, like they had been etched by decades of silence. She insisted was civility. I didn't know, she said. It wasn't an apology, more like a confession. About Firewall 9, about any of it. I didn't answer, because she did know. She just didn't want to understand. Behind her, Selina had sat down, hard, like the floor pulled her in. Her eyes were glassy, her mascara smudged. For once, she didn't try to fix it. I wanted to feel triumphant, to feel like justice had been served, but all I felt was peace. Not the kind you fight for, the kind that comes when you realize you don't need their validation to exist. Jason passed me again near the entrance. He didn't stop, just gave me a quiet nod and said, "They should have seen you years ago." I smiled, small and tired. "They did," I replied. "They just didn't look." And then I stepped out into the hallway, away from chandeliers and curated playlists, and into the kind of quiet that doesn't demand you shrink. I didn't need a mic, didn't need a toast. That moment wasn't mine to create. It was theirs to reckon with. The lounge on the 58th floor wasn't crowded. It never was. It was the kind of place where executives whispered secrets over dark whiskey and decisions were made without meetings. I liked it for the quiet and the view. Singapore glowed below, like a city that never questioned its right to shine. I sat with my boots off, heels sore from standing too tall for too long. A soft jazz track played in the background. Nobody here knew who I was. And that was the point. My phone buzzed once. Then again, missed calls. A voicemail from someone labelled Mother. I didn't listen. Another ping, this one from DC, confidential JTF cyber request, ethics board leadership. They wanted me back to head up the global task force on cyber warfare policy, a seat at the highest table. I could have accepted. It would have been a perfect arc, rejected by my own family, then leading the defence of nations. But I didn't click accept. Instead, I opened another message, one I'd saved for months. Reyes Initiative, grant approved the non-profit I started in secret, the one no one in my family knew about. It's called the Shadow Shield. We support service members, especially women, who've been undermined not by enemies but by their own people, their own families, their own institutions. We teach them how to rebuild not just careers but confidence, because sometimes the war isn't over territory, it's over memory, it's over silence. A few hours later, I walked barefoot onto the hotel balcony. Below me, the city pulsed, but up here, the air felt still. A knock came at the glass. A young boy, one of the staff, held a tray with late-night tea. He placed it down carefully, then hesitated. "Ma'am," he asked in accented English, "is it true you stopped a war?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Not the kind you're thinking of." He looked confused, so I added, "I just made sure the right people finally got seen." He smiled, a real one. "That's cool." And just like that, he was gone. Feet light, laugh echoing down the hallway. I sipped the tea, bitter but warm.